In the previous episode, we talked about Eli Lilly, which is a company that is valued at over $1 trillion. And we basically went over how Eli Lilly is investing in the future, which is artificial intelligence, and how they are spending a ton of money and partnering with different biotech companies as well as a big company like Nvidia to come up with the next generation of drugs. And this is part of our series to talk about how big pharma, how some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies are spending money in artificial intelligence. In this episode, I'm thrilled to talk about another pharma giant. And this company is valued at over $0.5 trillion, which is a lot of money. And this company has been around for a very long time, and it's it has made a lot of drugs. It has saved a lot of lives. Again, it's employing I think like roughly 140,000 people around the world, and its annual spending on research and development alone is it's I think at like $15 billion. And if this is not interesting enough, this company, its drug, touch over 1 billion patients each year. If this is not amazing impact, I don't know what is impact. And you can guess it by now. It's Johnson and Johnson. Now, I want you to imagine, Johnson and Johnson being, as big as it is, quietly turning artificial intelligence as a loose corner of its business, right? They are like going all in now on artificial intelligence. And I'm not talking about just like drug discovery or just clinical trials or just like manufacturing. But even inside the operating room itself, they are like going after the operating room where surgery is happening. They want to revolutionize surgery. Today, you know, we're going to be diving into Johnson and Johnson in this episode and their strategy to uncover, you know, how I want to help us uncover how one of the largest healthcare companies in human history is spending billions. I'm not saying millions, I'm saying like billions only to build what may become the operating system for modern medicine. Let's talk about numbers, okay? Before we talk about artificial intelligence, I want us to appreciate the scale we are dealing with. Johnson and Johnson generated approximately $82 billion in revenue in 2020. Let's take a look at 2025. In 2025, they generated $94 billion. Okay. Now, we are halfway through 2026, and the projection as it stands is that Johnson and Johnson stands to make more than $100 billion. That's in 2026. And as I mentioned earlier, the company is spending $15 billion annually on R&D and more than $40 million every single day on research. Okay. And roughly $1.7 million an hour. Again, if you want to think about seconds, they are spending $500 every second on R&D. Now, just want you to think about that, okay? And the scale at which this company is moving right now. While you've been listening to this podcast, Johnson & Johnson has already spent thousands of dollars developing future medicines and medical technologies. And increasingly, artificial intelligence is determining where much of that money goes. I have some fun fact for you. The fun fact number one. Johnson & Johnson has been around longer than electricity in most homes. The company was founded in 1886. To put that into perspective, the first modern automobile hadn't been invented yet. The Wright brothers hadn't flown an airplane yet. The Titanic hadn't been built when Johnson & Johnson was around. Another one, penicillin. which has been used to save lives across the world, hasn't even been discovered for like another 42 years. That's how long Johnson and Johnson has been around. Talk about legacy. Today, nearly 100 years later, the company is investing heavily in one of the most advanced technologies ever created. And of course, it's artificial intelligence. That's a remarkable transformation throughout the years. Now, why is Wall Street paying attention to Johnson and Johnson? As you all know, drug development is notoriously expensive, and we talked about why that is in the previous episode a little bit. And if you haven't listened to it yet, I would like to invite you to go check it out. But anyways, the idea of like bringing a single medicine from concept to approval from the FDA, for example, can cost between 1 billion to 2.6 billion dollars, depending on how costs are measured. Right? So this is insane. How expensive it is to create a single medicine. Even worse, approximately 90% of drug fails, 90% of drug candidates, they fail during development. And I'm talking about money that you never get to see come to fruition. 90%. So that's a high number. I want you to here's how to put this into perspective. You open for every you open a restaurant, right? And where 9 out of every 10 customers walk out after eating your food without paying. So you lose all that money. And this is part of the reason why drug is so expensive. That's essentially the economics of pharmaceutical research and development. 90% of the drugs they fail to make it to a given patient. So, and this is kind of why AI has become so attractive. The idea of like being able to reduce that number, it's incredible. If AI can improve, if AI can improve success rate by even a few percentage point, the financial impact, as you can imagine, can be enormous. For Johnson and Johnson, I want to say like a 5% improvement in research and development productivity could potentially translate to hundreds of millions of dollars each year. And so that's where AI comes into play. Okay, so let's switch gear and talk about another process that's helping Johnson and Johnson save so much time. We're talking about condensing 700 hours into 15 minutes, and all of that is being done using artificial intelligence. And this is this is happening at the regulatory level. According to company leadership at Johnson and Johnson, AI systems, artificial intelligence systems, have helped reduce regulatory documentation processes from approximately 700 hours to just 15 minutes. I want to say that again. Going from 700 hours to just 15 minutes. That's equivalent to going from 29 days or 4 full work months, nearly 18 work weeks. Now compare that to 15 minutes. This is incredible. This is not just an incremental improvement or progress. That's an entirely different way of operating. This is efficiency at its finest. Anyways, this is incredible. Now, I want to switch gear again and talk about AI inside the operating room, which is where Johnson and Johnson is truly making a difference. Most pharma companies are using AI, as you know it, to design and develop new drugs for new drug discovery. Johnson and Johnson wants to put AI directly into surgery. That's change. That's big. See, the thing is, every year, surgeons around the world, they perform hundreds of millions of procedures, right? Every one of those surgeries generates valuable data. We're talking about videos, instrument movement, surgical procedure decisions, patient outcomes, recovery metrics. Historically, much of that information disappeared after the procedure ended, right? You do the procedure and disappears. No one cares, really. Johnson and Johnson, they want to change that. The idea of seeing all that data not being put to use is not something that should be happening. So they want to change that. They've decided to obviously partner up with the biggest AI, company that exists right now. Really, it's Nvidia. They are partnering with Nvidia, and the goal is to transform surgeries into continuously improving learning system, really leveraging all that data. Imagine if every surgeon could learn from millions, I'm talking about millions of previous surgeries. That's what they're trying to do. Leveraging, the data that they've accumulated throughout the years to help surgeons. That's the vision, folks. Anyways, I want to talk about something that's interesting. Every surgical minute matters. Okay? Operating room costs can exceed. Okay? We're talking about $30 to $80 per minute. And it depends on the procedure and also on the complexity of the procedure and the type of hospital as well. That means if being able to reduce the times by even 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, that little reduction can potentially save thousands of dollars per procedure. That's what it's about, folks. It's about reducing the time. Multiply that across millions of procedures, and the economic opportunity becomes staggering. This is one of AI's, this is one of the biggest advantage for AI and why it has attracted so much attention. The idea of leveraging data and also the idea of really reducing the amount of time from all the learning that can be that can take place. It's just incredible. Now let's talk about manufacturing, which is the billion-dollar opportunity that very few to really no one is talking about. Manufacturing and how AI is changing that for Johnson and Johnson. So most AI headlines in pharma has to do with finding drugs, right? But some analysts believe that manufacturing may generate much faster returns for investors. I want you to consider this. Johnson and Johnson manufactures pharmaceuticals, orthopedic devices, surgical equipment, cardiovascular products, and even visual products across facilities from around the world. Now, imagine improving manufacturing efficiently by only 1%. Okay, just 1%. For a company generating $100 billion annually, even small gains can create enormous values. This is why AI is increasingly being deployed at Johnson& Johnson to predict equipment failures, improve production yields, reduce waste, and optimize supply chains. And the thing is, as an average customer, you may never see this work, but investors, I tell you, they do. They do. When you're looking at the SEC forms, you do, right? Anyways, I want to talk about another interesting thing about Johnson and Johnson and how they own more than 26 billion data points. Healthcare organizations generate vast amount of information every year from patients because every time you go to the doctor, they have to get your information, and they've been doing that for years. We're talking about patient records, clinical trials, manufacturing metrics, imaging data, genomic data. I mean, I can keep going. Device performance data. J&J's challenge so far is no longer collecting data. They're really good at that. In fact, they're like one of the best companies at collecting data. Really, their challenge is really making sense of the data that they've been collecting. So, if you're listening to this and you have ideas about how they can put their data to good use, you might be onto something. Anyways, this is where AI becomes essential for Johnson and Johnson, and quite frankly for other companies as well. Without AI, much of the information, much of the data that has been collected, it's gonna remain unused. It's gonna be useless in a way. But with AI, it really put Johnson and Johnson at a competitive advantage. So this is really where AI is gonna change things for not only Johnson and Johnson but also other companies. All right, so I've talked about how Johnson and Johnson is leveraging AI to do all sorts of amazing things and saving time and also improving manufacturing and also saving money and really improving how they do things. Now let's talk about return on investment. Where is the real return on investment, right? When investors hear AI, they often expect immediate results. However, in in healthcare, that doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. A drug, we're talking about a drug discovered today, may not reach patients for 8 years, or even 10 years, sometimes even 15 years. The return on investment for Johnson and Johnson is measured differently today. Instead, here's what they ask, right? Here's what they ask. One of the things that they ask is, can we discover targets faster? Can we recruit trial patients faster? Can we manufacture more efficiently? Can we reduce paperwork? Can we improve surgery outcomes? So it's about speed, efficiency, and also having proper results. If the answer to each of those questions is yes, the cumulative effect could be transformative. Here's what I want to close with, to wrap things up a bit. And again, thank you for bearing with me so far. Johnson and Johnson isn't betting that AI will discover one miracle drug. No, they're not doing that. You have other companies that are doing that kind of stuff. Here's what they are doing instead. They are betting AI will improve thousands of decisions made every single day across one of the largest healthcare organizations on the planet. The company spends roughly $40 million every day on research and development alone. The question isn't whether artificial intelligence AI will influence Johnson and Johnson. The question is whether Johnson and Johnson can successfully use artificial intelligence to influence the future of healthcare itself. And based on the scale of investment we are seeing today, that's exactly the future they are trying to build. Once again, I'm your host, Dr. Casey, and thank you so much for joining us today. Until next time.